All right. Okay. Welcome. Sometimes that seems so like ching, ching, ching. It's time for the toast, the speech. Jason Murphy, welcome. Rebel Dharma, Wednesday night. Glad you're here. Those of you in the room, those of you on Zoom. Let's see if there's a few more people. Yeah, someone else. So anyone new to the center or that wants to introduce themselves?
Yeah, I'm Chris. I just came out from Connecticut yesterday.
All right.
Last night, so good to be here.
Great.
Good talk. So.
Yeah. I think, have we met?
We met Facebook maybe?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You wrote a book, yeah?
A few, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, Nora was working first.
Right. I remember. Yeah, we've met both.
In person.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I'm Bobby. I'm visiting my friend Judy here.
All right.
And looking forward to this.
Visitors. Love it.
Bruce, and I'm with Bob, and we're visiting Judy down in the Bay Area.
All right. Welcome. Anyone else? How about online? Okay. Online's the usual suspects. How about in YouTube in the future? Anyone want to introduce themselves? Feel free. Just let us know who you are, how long you've been coming to the group or meditating. Just send it to us. We'll catch it later. So I wanted to continue from the theme of last week. I think I accidentally started a heart practice series. Last week I was talking about, the state of the world, the suffering. And yet again, this was a kind of response, to the political stuff that's happening and the, this suffering world. And, this week it's, another school shooting, right? There's been so many school shootings, so many tragedies, loss of life. How do we manage, So last week I talked about the foundation of positive regard. And, from the Buddhist perspective, this idea of what are called the Brahma Viharas, which really, and then just to infuse from the kind of punk community, this is a positive mental attitude, which is really what we're talking about, PMA, And PMA is something that, I didn't grow up really knowing, I wasn't really surrounded by a positive mental attitude. But in, the kind of the late 80s, early 90s, the punk scene really became very vibrant with animal rights activists and veganism and, anti-race, anti-fascist. I mean, it's always been anti-fascist, but anti-racist kind of tenets. And there was this whole movement within the hardcore punk rock movement that was about having a positive mental attitude. And I guess actually it goes all the way back to Cro-Mags and Bad Brains and this idea from, of how can we be enraged with all of the shit that's going on in our lives, and at the same time hold a positive mental attitude or some positive regard so that we don't, kind of like lose hope. Otherwise, it could feel hopeless. And for me, like coming out of the Reagan era, Carter-Reagan era, the threat of nuclear annihilation was the undertone. and we had the, whatever, the tuck and roll or the, whatever it was, the false sense of security, to feel better, and I have no idea what the false sense of security is for children today around the threat of whatever, COVID, the threat of being shot at in your school, So just in response to, what was talked about last week, and then we kind of ended in talking more about compassion. And then I was like, oh, well, I'll just cover more of compassion next week. And really talking about compassion in a way that is fierce, that is courageous, that is maybe the kind of the opposite of the way people kind of view compassion, perhaps. And it was pointed out that these deities that we have here, I'll show those of you at home. I'll try to. I think I might just destroy the camera situation, but I'll try anyway. So there's Mahakala, and I thought it was a different wrathful deity. And in the Tibetan iconography, which these are mostly Tibetan images, because they had just have the coolest images. They're really talented artists, the Tibetans, the Thangkas, bringing all of the kind of Buddhist principles and into life, into this kind of artistic expression, iconographic kind of imagery with some deep meaning. So Mahakala is the deity of fierce compassion, wrathful compassion. And so that's kind of the topic tonight, courageous, what I like to call kind of courageous compassion. So I'm going to talk for a little bit about it, kind of set it up a little bit, and then we'll end the night with the practice. And, we kind of do this as a way, oftentimes when you come here, we'll sit, we'll meditate. There's some teaching kind of unpacked in the meditation, and then there's some kind of explanation or further kind of depth into the teaching. But I feel like with the heart practices, of course, we could just do that. We could just, because I'm super experiential. Like I like to just do the experience, or have the experience of meditation. And then, is it feeling stuffy in here?
A little bit.
Can we get the air on a little bit? Either the air or the, thanks, John. So this idea of like kind of front loading a little bit about the teaching to encapsulate the practice. So that's what I'm going to do today. And then I'll, open up for some questions, and then we'll get into some practice. So just a kind of overview for people. All of the, what are called the heart practices, are also known as the sublime states. And I'm going to read a little piece from Nyanaponika. Nyanaponika is probably one of my favorite authors around these teachings, a German-born monk who lived in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is considered the preserver of Buddhism, the savior of Buddhism, because when I think it was the Moors, or when the basically Muslim folks at that time were ravaging through or invading into India, that they were trying to wipe out Buddhism. This is, 500 years after the Buddha died. And the what's known as the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya, India, what they were just trying to wipe, knocking down the temples and all these different kinds of things, just trying to wipe out, as cultures do when someone is invading. And a sapling. So first of all of the Pali Canon, the original teachings of the Buddha that were kind of 200 years later translated and then eventually written down, were brought to Sri Lanka, because Sri Lanka is an island, and a sapling of the Bodhi tree also brought to Sri Lanka. And there, the Sri Lankan monks, from that time and probably, and definitely since then, have become the scholarly monks of the Theravadan tradition. And so Nyanaponika, who writes about the sublime states, had this to say: the sublime states, or the heart practices, are the great removers of tension, the great peacemakers in social conflict, and the great healers of wounds suffered in the struggle of existence. The great healers of wounds suffered in the struggle of existence. So Buddhism implies that there is going to be struggle in this existence. And whether we suffer about it or don't suffer about it has so much to do with our positive mental attitude or not. Our mental attitude, our approach, our perception of reality. Reality actually isn't changing. I don't know if you guys knew that or not. But our perception of reality is what changes. And it's up to each of us to find that out. So the 4 aspects of these heart practices, loving kindness, or as I talked about last week, my favorite way to talk about it is really friendliness or positive regard. The second, being compassion. The third, I like to call selfless joy. Sometimes it's called sympathetic joy, this kind of joy in the joy of others and our own joy. And these are balancing. They're balancing each other. And then there's the equanimity. Equanimity, I'll talk a little bit about equanimity today, but I think I'm going to go for the next few weeks. I'll just go through each one because each one really deserves to be unpacked. And last week we kind of went a little bit into compassion because they're intrinsically linked. One of the ways I like to think about this practice, these 4 aspects, are 4 chambers of the heart working together, simultaneously bringing life to each moment. So I like to think about them that way. So compassion. The Buddha was once asked, what is it that you teach? And he replied, I teach that there is suffering and that there is an end to suffering. That is all. But there is suffering and there is an end to suffering. That is all. And then he spent the next, 45 years. I don't know when he gave that teaching, but whether it was his, 3rd year after becoming enlightened or not, I don't know. But my sense is from the first teaching to the last teaching, this was the tenet. This is what he was trying to kind of get across to people. So compassion is sometimes, or the word karuna is sometimes translated as a quivering of the heart, a movement of the heart towards the suffering of others and our own suffering. And I've always really loved that image. It's like a quivering of a heart. So there's a movement. There's some movement. There's some empathetic understanding. And there's even some images, I think more, the Kuan Yin, more in the Chinese, of this kind of compassion in action is another kind of Kuan Yin, the feminine, kind of like with one foot off the cushion and like getting up to get into action. It's always what it reminded me of, this kind of springing from this meditative practice into action. And so we'll talk a little bit about that too. But compassion, can sometimes be misunderstood as a state of being overwhelmed by the suffering of others. I think I talked a little bit about this last week, and just this idea of there's so much pain in this world that if we open to it, we might be swallowed up by it. Ever feel that way? And if we open up to the amount of pain that we have endured, if we actually open up to it, we might be overtaken by it, never to return. I think sometimes people feel this way about any of these really kind of heavy emotions, I think actually sometimes people feel that way about joy too. If I let in too much joy, you don't hear this as much, but there's definitely those people that I really relate to. Let in too much joy and you might, I don't know, die of joyness. But there's some fear opening to an emotion fully, love, because there's a risk involved. So I see this as wrong view, this kind of being overwhelmed. Compassion is being overwhelmed by the suffering of others. And so people tend to shut down, distance themselves. Compassion to me is not about feeling overwhelmed by our own pain or the pain of others, but rather engaging in life with full awareness of the anguish or suffering in our lives and the lives of others. So how can we do that? How do we engage with our own suffering and the suffering in this world without feeling overwhelmed or shut down? I think really difficult. I think it's not taught. But we're trying. This is where Buddhism comes into play. And these heart practices. I didn't come across the heart practices for several years of meditation. And maybe it just was like, the teachers that I came across just felt like maybe I wasn't ready, or I was, too cynical, or I just needed to really focus on the 4 foundations of mindfulness, being breath and body meditation, kind of understanding the, what's happening here in the mind. That could be one. It also could be that I didn't want to hear it because I thought it was all just a bunch of hippie bullshit. I might have just dissociated from the teaching, like someone would talk about loving kindness and I would just roll my eyes and check out and go back to my concentration practice. Yeah. I don't actually remember. It was so long ago. But I believe, particularly in this idea of compassion, is how do we engage with full awareness of the suffering, not turning away, not shutting down, recognizing that, children and teachers in an elementary school were shot and killed. And know that there's nothing we can do about that right now. That's done. That happened. And that there's pain involved in that. An opening to that. And seeing what happens in the mind around it. And so the staying in contact with the pain that's experienced, it's really fucking hard to do. But we do it. This is what is asked of us. The first noble truth, there is suffering in this world. And it's a coming out of denial of that fact, the understanding that we all suffer in little ways or in big ways. We have ups and downs, we have our pains and our losses, but instead of being overwhelmed by that fact, by avoiding or shutting down or seeking to numb out, so many ways that we can numb out. And I'm not sitting up here saying I'm totally equanimous and open to all. I've open and close and open and close and like to binge Netflix. Like anyone, I'm totally into Star Trek, the new, whatever it is, the new generation, new order. I don't know, whatever. Strange New World. Strange New World. That's what it is. So good. So I want to just be realistic, you know what I mean? It's not like I'm like meditating all the time and contemplating the suffering of the world and, no. But when I engage. And sometimes that might mean action, And that's one of the things about, I think, empathy, which is closely related to compassion. This idea of, I can sense another person's pain because I have experienced a similar pain, a pain of loss. Some pain of trauma, a pain of abandonment, a pain of rejection. And sometimes through empathy, we can begin to take action and do what we can to try to create a positive change in the world. But in my view, we can't do that if we're not able to hold the pain and care about our own pain, our own suffering. I think equanimity comes in to say, that's what it's like here. There's pain. There's, so many different, we've created whole psychological, we have feeling charts about it that we deny. Ever seen the feeling wheel? There's like 100 feelings that we've learned to articulate. What I love about Buddhism is Buddhism brings it down to pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And if we start there, oh, what does this feel like here and now? Unpleasant. And then we can, further engage our cognitive abilities to give more language to it. Are we following? Okay. Yeah, that, compassion isn't about being passive. And it's the opposite of cruelty. It's the opposite of indifference or pity. I think this is one of the things that people close off to compassion from others, because it might come across as pity. I don't want anybody to pity me for my suffering. I felt that way before. Closing off to care from other people. I think the conditioning at the time was I didn't want to seem weak. Which is pretty weak, actually. Because it takes courage to open to our own suffering. It takes courage to open to the suffering of others. And this is why these wrathful deities are represented. We have to muster that power, So compassion is, engaging a knowing and wise heart to our suffering. And it's out of compassion that Siddhartha Gautama, soon to be the Buddha, left home and sought out wisdom and freedom from suffering. Out of compassion, seeing the suffering in the world and recognizing his own dissatisfaction with the way things are. Huge motivator. It's out of compassion that the Buddha decided to teach the Dharma, decided to get up off of his blissed out meditative state and walk the earth for 45 years, teaching to anyone that wanted to. Anyone that was open to listening. There's this statement, there's this teaching. In every generation, there will be few with less dust in their eyes. Right? So this idea of dust in the eye is delusion from the kind of Buddhist perspective. And that what these practices help us to do is to hopefully remove the dust. And that there will be some in every generation that have less dust in their eye. That's you guys, by the way. You have less dust in your eye. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. I believe that it's compassion that brings us to meditation, our own practice. It's through our shared sense of pain that we can relate to each other. It's one of the reasons why we have you guys kind of share a little bit, talk a little bit to each other, or this relational dharma that I do from time to time. So this truth given light that helps us know that others have lessened their pain in their lives, and that we can too. I think this is one of the great things about, group therapy. I think it's one of the great things about, like 12-step models or, group like community self-help models? Is this kind of shared pain? And the seeing, how we can connect there. I think that's kind of enough for now, and I'll maybe get back to. I'll finish. I don't want to go on and on. Kind of have a lot of notes. I feel like maybe it's time to kind of put this into action. Yeah, let's have some practice. So I'll kind of explain what we're going to do, and then we'll take a little stretch break because you guys have already been sitting for half an hour. At least those of you that are on the cushions. So opening to the suffering of others, opening to our own suffering, there's some repeated phrase. There's some, this is kind of how it's been taught for probably 1,000 years. Maybe 1,500 years. This kind of utilizing some phrases that will allow some shift to take place, some mental shift. And I think the practice, as in all practices of meditation, is about recognizing when the attention wanders off. And where does it go? So if we're talking about opening to compassion, or opening to the suffering, caring about the suffering or the sorrow or the loss or the fear or the illness, when the mind goes, where does it go? Don't spend a whole lot of time analyzing it, but just recognize, just acknowledge. Oh, I don't want to think about this, or whatever, whatever the experience is. I don't want to front load too much of what your experience should be, because I don't know what it's going to be. But to just bring that attention to, okay, where does the mind go? And then back to the phrasing. And we'll start with others. Maybe we'll start with the collective. Children and the teachers in the school in Texas. Does anyone remember the name of the Uvalde? Uvalde. Okay. Uvalde Elementary School. Yeah. Is that right?
That's the city. It's Rob.
Rob. Okay, great. So we'll use that as a launching point. And then see where we go. So go ahead, if you feel like you need to stretch out, take a minute or two. We'll be right back. All right, here we go. Too hot, too cold. Turtle?
It's too hot for me.
And then it'll get too hot. So finding a posture that's workable, sustainable, where you can be relaxed and alert. And bringing in some connection to your own heart, your own mind. Our wish, desire for happiness, well-being. And then in some way, just bring it into your mind, bring it into your imagination, the folks that are really suffering around the loss of their children or their parents, those who were injured. In the elementary school in Texas. Just imagining that community. Also the community in New York, devastated by racially motivated murder. I'm just saying something very simple like, may you hold your pain with compassion. May you hold your pain with compassion. And just repeating the phrase, may you hold your pain with compassion. I care about your pain and sorrow. If that feels a little distant, I care about your pain and sorrow. May I learn to care about your pain and sorrow. May you hold your pain with compassion, your sadness, your loss. May your suffering be eased. Thinking about the families of the children slain, of the teachers, the gunmen. I care about your suffering. How much suffering to motivate someone to walk into a school and shoot children? The families the families of those slain and the families of the shooters. Suffering. Seeing if you can shift now to someone that you love and care for, someone who you know is struggling in some way, suffering, sorrow, or fear, sadness, an illness. Shifting your attention there, envisioning them. I think of my sister. Envisioning someone in your life Feeling free to replace the word pain with suffering or sadness, fear, loss, illness, whatever word is most appropriate. I care about your pain and sorrow. May you be free from your pain and sorrow. May you hold your pain and sorrow with compassion. May your pain and sorrow be eased. Feeling the connection, if you can, to the heart space. If it feels hard to connect because there's protective or numbing, maybe place a hand on the chest, on the heart, or on the belly, or both. May your pain and sorrow be eased. May you be free from suffering. May you hold your pain with compassion. Seeing this person receiving these wishes, receiving this care from your heart to their heart. And when you're ready, letting them go and just come back to your own breath, your own body, your own heart. Perhaps imagining yourself either as a younger you, sometime in the past, a time when you were really suffering and needed some compassion, or today, right now. I care about my pain and sorrow. I care about this pain. May I hold this pain with compassion. May this pain be a doorway to freedom. May I hold this pain with compassion. May I be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. And beginning to expand out in all directions. The left and to the right, in front of you, behind you, above and below. May all suffering beings hold their pain with compassion. Those sitting around you, I care about your suffering. I care about your pain. May you hold your pain with compassion. May your struggles lessen. May your pain be eased. Sorrow, sadness, fear, or loss. Whatever flavor of pain you're experiencing. May this be eased. Expanding out in all directions. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. All right. So now, I'd like for you to turn to someone, preferably not someone you came with, actually. Let's see. Probably groups of 3. Turn towards and just talk a little bit about that experience for you. Okay, and I'm gonna put you guys in some rooms. So go ahead, just turn towards and just talk about that experience. 2s or 3s, try to be in 3s. Please, if you're if you're on Zoom, please attend the group.
The masses, like,
There always seems to be a point. I try to meditate every day, like, always. It's like exercise, you know, it's great for you, but, you know. But almost every time I do it.
All right, I guess we'll have a conversation. 4 of us. 3 of us. Go ahead. Hi, Valerie. I need you to unmute yourself. Oh, you don't have a, I see. Sorry, Shannon. I see. I'll put you, sorry, Shannon. Shannon, I just sent you to a room. There you go. Hey, Valerie, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Just nod yes. Okay, we'll be right back. back around. Maybe. I think we lost a few. All right, so how was that for people? Oh, here we go. How was that for people? Anyone want to kind of share what that experience was like, whether it be the meditation or the small group? And if you're in the Zoom, you can raise your little hand in the reactions. Please.
Yeah. When you said we were gonna break off, introverted Chris was immediately like, oh God, no, not at all. But that's something I'm working on diligently. So I got to have a really lovely conversation between friends and the Sangha, which I'm trying to get deeply rooted in.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very grateful for it. Share, from heart space and good, bad, so it was illuminating. So
Cool.
grateful that you had to do that.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else?
I actually had a very difficult time staying in the place where we were focusing on the incidents that just recently happened.
Mm-hmm.
Because yes, that's tremendous amount of pain and sorrow that all I could do in my own little way is to put out my feelings toward directly at that incident. Then it got to a point where I started to kind of pull away from the earth, and I saw the earth as a whole and realized there is a lot of pain down there, that's out of my control. I can't control it.
Mm-hmm.
But I can do the best I can in my own little way to make either to put a good vibe on the whole thing, or with people I interact with. Like at the end, we were thinking of people that we know.
Mm-hmm.
That spreads everywhere.
Yeah.
That emotion and that feeling. And I thank you for it.
Well, if I only came up with the practice, then I'm just passing on. But yes, no, thank you. I appreciate that. And I'll take that. And just to kind of reiterate for those of you at home, the first person spoke of just feeling like sharing and connecting, and then having a little bit of resistance to that in the beginning, mainly due to introvertedness and kind of, perhaps, I don't know, with some kind of resistance, and then just going into that experience and grateful. And then the other person spoke about having a hard time at first with the difficulty, or the shootings and the kind of where we started, and then expanded out into really seeing the suffering world, right, and all the suffering that's around us, all the pain, and the earth itself, and then getting specific with sending compassion towards those who need it, but who you may know and have some kind of connection with. Yeah. Anyone else? Roger.
Hi. I think Michael actually did have his hand up first, but
Yeah, I'll go backwards. We got plenty of
okay,
time.
fair enough. Thank you very much for working this topic. I do feel that at this stage in my education into Buddhism, that getting some information, some offering about how to view the situation as a Buddhist is helping me, and I appreciate you working on that, on the topic in general. I'm also trying to look at this and try to figure out how to bolt in forgiveness. There's, forgiving the shooter, the person that was holding a gun. There's also, forgiving the elements in society that are resisting change, to move either to a society that doesn't value guns so much, or to a society where we have effective controls. Trying to figure out how to move from compassion into forgiveness. And if you want to say, Roger, we're going to talk about that next week or something, that's okay. But I'm also trying to that's another aspect of this that I am trying to grapple with.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. All right. And I'll see what I can do about forgiveness. Mark.
Thanks, Jason. I really enjoyed the meditation and the way that you led the meditation and kind of directed us in it. And touched on, when you said trying to imagine what type of suffering the person that was going through that did this, and I think about that quite often. What could push a person to be suffering that much to be able to do that, and put a lot of thought in that. And also when it turned about someone close to us, there's people on here, and I'm not sure if I shared it with you, but I lost one of my best friends on May 3rd to a really freak accident. And I've been dealing with, putting the memorial together. His daughter that used to talk to him every day, lives here in Huntington, but the mom lives in Lake Havasu, and she can't be right there, and kind of being a go-between and all that stuff, and just learning from you and Noah and Ward and my other teachers about compassion, because I always thought that being compassionate meant really caring, but then coming up with a solution for these people of how they're supposed to deal with their sorrow. And I realized that that's not what it was. It was just to make myself available and to let them know that I'm available, not try to tell them what they need to do, how they need to feel, or what, trying to change what they're going through, but just to know that I'm available for them. So I really appreciate all of you for teaching me that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing. Mikey Mike.
Thanks, Jason. I think the meditation, it kind of, I had a lot of different feelings going on. But I just kind of felt that I could hold space for others' suffering and my own suffering, and not I think of old default mechanisms of anger, disassociation, denial, and you talked about weakness, equating it with weakness, that toxic, those toxic mindsets, and now I feel like just holding space and opening your heart and holding space, and it's just such a better way to be. And one point in the meditation where I really tightened and got aversive was when the shooter got brought up. And I got very aversive and tight, but then you said something about how much suffering would compel someone to do something so barbaric and so heinous, and that really resonated deep. And and then I have a loved one who's going through a lot of pain today, and I put space in my heart for that. And it was a really, really good meditation, and thank you for leaning into stuff like this and engaging. I'm grateful. Thank you.
Thank you guys for participating in the small groups. Anyone else in the room want to kind of share anything about? Yeah.
I didn't know so much about it, but supposed to be this pain. But what people did it, like, you know, out of the stranger, became an Arab, just to show some. Like, there was this compassion that.
Well, so even if someone is delusional, there is some kind of suffering attached to that. And it can be hard. It can be hard to have compassion for a perpetrator. Yet, how many perpetrators have been abused or harmed in some way, you know? How many, you know, I mean, even like, I'll just go there, like the unforgivable molestation of children. How many molested people or molesters were molested? How much pain do people have to endure to be able to kind of, you know, carry that out, spill that suffering out and over? Because why?
Well, like, what was the big guy that took stood because there was so much money.
I mean, maybe I would want to know a lot more about the what's underneath that, because I don't actually believe that we're not, and maybe this is my, like, I don't know, idealism, altruism. I don't believe that murderers that are in prison for life did it to be happy. I think it's a perpetuation of suffering. I think in every case. Because unless you were what? Conditioned and, you know, unless there's some distortion, right? It reminds me of the story of, I forgot his name now, with the thumbs.
Yeah.
Angulimala. Yeah. It reminds me of the story of Angulimala, who out of their own delusion and misteachings and misguidance became a rabid, murdering, you know, out of their mind person who, out of their own conditioning, right, that was set up that way. And so, yeah, I mean, you know, I don't know about, you know, this person or that person, and I'm bringing up controversial stuff. I did that absolutely on purpose, because we get so focused on the victim or the children, which is horrible. The compassionate teaching of the Buddha is that all beings suffer. And it's convenient to say, oh, well, you know, that little kid with cancer, or, you know, this person who got killed in a car accident, or, you know, what about the drunk driver? No suffering there? Probably.
Like the Navajos believe that if you murder or steal, or right, that you've stepped off the path of beauty, so it takes the community to heal that person, as opposed to viewing them as a criminal and a monster.
Right, yeah. So there's this coming together.
Yeah, and I think that's, so when I'm friends with Ed Kemper, the Santa Cruz mass murderer. So when you're talking about mass murderers who redeem themselves, you know, not 2,000 years ago, he spent his life in prison trying to figure out why he did what he did. And bizarrely won the Humanitarian of the Year award for reading the most amount of books for the blind because he's trying to make amends.
Mhm.
And so, you know, when you think about both those stories,
Mhm.
you know, people can try to redeem themselves and they can try to understand their suffering. I think even someone who's a mass murderer.
Yeah, I just, so again, the teaching of the Buddha is that the appropriate response to suffering is compassion, always. And it's okay if we can't get there yet. It's okay. It's not like you have to let in all the suffering. You have to be compassionate towards every houseless person you see. You have to, you know what I mean? Like, but it is about, can we try this on? You know, and can we shift from victims and perpetrators and rescuers to those suffering, and may those that are suffering find freedom. Who hasn't suffered? We have time for one more, I'm sorry, and so that'll be Shannon. Go ahead.
Again, thank you, Jason, for these topics. Compassion as practice is something I have to do all day, every day at work. And, you know, I'm in field with people that are in crisis and people that so much of society deems unworthy of a chance. And, you know, there's been moments where I question my want to help them in that moment. And it's been so important to me to be able to sit back and understand where their pain possibly has come from and imagining them, you know, as a child, you know, before any of those things happen to them, to get them to the point like where they're at. And today, you know, in the practice, just the pain involved of feeling all of the things, it can be a lot, you know, but it does lessen the anger to be able to picture people who they were before all the pain and all of the suffering, before they were raised a certain way. So I don't know if that would be beneficial for anyone else, but it's something that really helps me before we decide who's worthy of compassion and who's not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said. Thank you, Shannon. And that's a great, I mean, that's what I was instructing us to do for ourselves, you know, because for a lot of people, we don't feel worthy of compassion for ourselves in this as an adult in the here and now, but maybe when we were younger. And the reason why I kind of take such a strong stance is, well, just it's the reality of things. I mean, it's the teaching. And yeah, I feel like anything that steps outside of our, anything that is causing suffering is motivated by delusion, by misguidedness. And it has a negative karmic response or a positive karmic response. And that ultimately that's equanimity, is that it's not like we can take away someone else's pain. Someone just wrote, original goodness exists in all. That's the belief. And you don't have to believe it. That's the other thing. You know, you don't have to believe in any of this. And meditation is still pretty fucking useful. But to pay attention to where the resistance comes in. Pay attention to, you know, am I worthy of that kind of compassion or forgiveness too? Or are they the worst offender? So more to think about. 9 o'clock. Thank you for your time and attention. Please know that this center is run on the donation of those who attend. There's a link in the chat, and there is a bowl with a QR code on the desk. And if you would like to support me as a teacher, you can Venmo me at No BS Buddhist or Jason Murphy. Also on PayPal under Jason Murphy. Thank you for your time and attention. And I think there's a link tree or something in the chat because Mike is awesome. And so gathering all the goodness of our practice, all the tenderness of our hearts and minds, and may any goodness that's been gathered by this practice, any goodness that's been accumulated, may this goodness be dedicated to the freedom from suffering for all beings everywhere. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering.